We are
I grabbed the
live.
door.
We are live. And we are going to continue our discussion or rediscussion of cannabis fees. We do have Senator Chittenden's proposal on the website. And the cannabis report is also on our website under James Pepper's name. And I'm not sure where the best place to start is. Do you have a preference?
No, but I just would think James Pepper might be the best approach. And I also wanted to overlay a comment that happened while we were offline with the door open, which is the report that Cannabis Control Board generated, I believe, estimated that outdoor growers grow about 1/4 as much crop at most as an indoor cultivator. And they really sometimes get 6 times the yield. And if you take that ratio and overlay it to our current fee structure, right now indoor growers are about twice as much as outdoor growers. But cutting the outdoor growers in half, which is what this amendment would do, would really put in line with what the yields are relative to what the so I think that's the strongest argument I've heard yet for this is that this would effectively match what the outdoor cultivation fee is to what we're seeing the yields be relative to the growers.
Okay, Mr. Belvance has joined us, so we will take his testimony first. This why he thinks this would be a good idea, and then we'll hear from James, and then we'll hear from Ted. So, Mr. Bell, welcome. This is the Senate Finance Committee. We just asked you to introduce yourself, and then the floor is yours.
Sure. My name is Sam Bellavance. I'm the owner of Sunset Lake Cannabis up here in South Hero, Vermont. And yeah, I thank the committee for letting me testify today. I think the proposal of cutting the outdoor fee makes a lot of sense for creating a more fair and equitable market here in Vermont. And happy to answer any questions. Do you want me to get right into it?
Yeah, tell us how that fee impacts you.
Yeah, so, right now, I think there's 3 main arguments that the outdoor fee as it stands right now, for me, it's $18,000 a year. It is too high. One, we get 1 crop per year as an outdoor farmer. So I, might harvest a large amount. We might harvest 1,200 pounds of, smokable cannabis flower. But again, that's once per year versus an indoor facility that is maybe it's a lower tier, so they get charged a larger or lower fee. They're going to be producing maybe 500 pounds every 3 months. So they're still going to be producing more volume and having a larger impact on the marketplace, but not paying the same amount of fee we are because we only have that 1 shot per year. So that's, I think, the first and foremost argument. Just because an outdoor grow is physically bigger, it does not mean that it's producing more product. And I think what we want to do is line up these fees where if you're producing the most amount of product, that is correlated to the fee structure, not how physically large your location is. I do have 2 more arguments, and I think this comes mainly from my background. My family has a dairy farm in Alburgh in South Hero. I think it's really important for the committee to note there is no USDA-backed crop insurance for cannabis. So if we get hit by a storm, let's say another Hurricane Irene comes through and goes through the islands, I have no insurance for my crop. And because I'm growing outdoors next to a cornfield, I'm very vulnerable to that. So if there's flooding, if there's a high wind event, if this was one of our cornfields, we could use the SDRP disaster relief program and get funding from the federal government for that. That just doesn't exist in the cannabis market. So that's a risk that outdoor growers face, that if you're indoor in a warehouse, you don't have that risk. And I think what Vermont could do, we could say, let's create a disaster relief insurance program for these outdoor cannabis farmers. But that would be setting up a whole program. It would probably be very expensive. We'd have to hire state employees to manage it. I think a better approach would say, let's recognize that risk and just bake that into the fee structure. And I think that would be a really, really simple way to address it. And then my last point, before I turn it back over to you folks, I think there are just objectively positive benefits to promoting outdoor cannabis agriculture. From a sustainability standpoint, we are not using kilowatt hours, megawatt hours of electricity to grow these plants. We're just using the sun and we're using the rain. The only irrigation we use comes from a well on our farm property. So we're not even tapping into the municipal water supply at all. So it's a very low impact in terms of energy resources. It's also for our rural landscape, we're right near Snow Farm Vineyards. We're near my family's dairy farm. The fact that we're growing outside, we kind of just blend into the landscape of rural Vermont. My cannabis farm is right next to the Allen Home apple orchard. And we've been here for years and no one has really ever had a problem with it because most people drive by and they see greenhouses, they see rows of trellises. It fits within Vermont's rural landscape. Whereas, I'd say a 20,000, 30,000 square foot warehouse that's using, massive amounts of electricity and needs huge equipment, that just doesn't fit. It's almost like a data center. It doesn't fit into the landscape of rural Vermont. And I think that's something we need to consider as well. So I'll end there and turn over to the committee for any questions.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any questions? We may have an amendment now.
I have a question that I'm not sure you would know the answer to. It might be more for our next witness for Pepper, so I'll just say it so you can. We just passed a bill that I'm scrolling through as you were talking, because you were mentioning the sort of disaster relief, like if a hurricane comes through and you lose your crop. We just passed the Farm and Forestry Security Fund bill, which was my bill, and I was just scrolling through to see if cannabis farmers are included in it. And I think it may be a definitional issue. And it's already passed, so we can't amend it at this point, but do you have to follow the RAPs, the required agricultural practices?
I believe we do. And again, where in Vermont statutes cannabis is agriculture and where it isn't agriculture has been kind of an ongoing issue and certainly a frustration for farmers. Because I think in some aspects of the statutes it is and others it isn't. And I would say as someone who's not an attorney, who's just a farmer, it has been confusing to figure out what are we qualified for, what exemptions do we get, what do we not get. So I would be happy to follow up with you on that.
Okay, well, I can ask James Pepper, but also our attorney. It doesn't necessarily change anything about the fee. It doesn't change anything about the fees and your arguments for the fees. It's just a question of, would you be eligible for this new program that would help in the event of a natural disaster? But thank you.
Awesome. Yep, thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Thank you for being willing to show up on very short notice and conduct your meeting in your automobile, I assume, or truck.
Yeah.
One, including members of this committee who have done that.
Thank you.
And thank you. And if we have any other questions, we'll be back in touch.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, James, we're finding out the problems with crossover week, which is you get 20 minutes when you make decisions in 20 minutes. You are prone to make mistakes or miss things. And apparently this is the kind of amendment that should have been put on in economic development because they had time to go through and look at all the implications to the entire program. They missed it. It was brought to my attention about 10 minutes after this committee adjourned for the week. And the bill had been voted out. So we are now back looking at a potential amendment, which I gather economic development has passed. And it is now unofficially here. But the bill is on the floor tomorrow, so we're going to need to make a decision. So, your thoughts?
I will try and help you with that to the extent that I can. For the record, James Pepper, Chair of the Cannabis Control Board. I was available for the testimony this morning in Senate Economic Development. The rationale for this reduction has been, summarized nicely by Senator Shipman and by Sam Bellavance. On the fees, I'm sure you remember, Madam Chair, the fee setting, we were given a directive to propose a fee structure that would set fees at a rate that would cover our proposed budget. At the time, JFO evaluated that proposal and said, this may or may not cover your budget. It will certainly lead to a less thriving market. Is the terminology they use. This is all the footnotes for this report posted under my name. Because you set fees so high that they cover the kind of cost of, our rent and our employee salaries, and only a handful of very well capitalized multi-state operators are going to be able to enter this market. It would certainly contravene the intent, which was written into the original cannabis legislation, to support small local farmers. So with that knowledge, you looked at ways to maximize fee revenue while also making an accessible market. So you have relatively low fees compared to our neighboring states on the small end, on the 1,000 square foot or less. And then they are scaled up to make the larger operations much more unattractive to these larger multi-state operators. And it's been very successful in achieving that intent. I think, we have, 400 cultivators out of our 572 licensees, and 75% of those are tier 1 small cultivators, both indoor and outdoor, but they are the smallest of the small. And by the way, our tier 1, 1,000 square feet or less, barely registers in any other state. That would be considered a micro license. By way of reference, the smallest here in Massachusetts is 5,000 square feet, which would be a tier 3. And also one of our largest license types. So, last year, Senate Economic Development, this committee, to a lesser extent, this committee took a lot of testimony from outdoor cultivators saying exactly what you heard from Sam Bellavance today, which is from a relative profitability standpoint, indoor cultivators just have a much higher potential for profitability compared to their outdoor counterparts. A square foot of canopy outdoors is worth about a quarter of what it's worth indoors. And that's not really even taking into account the higher price that indoor cannabis generally fetches at the wholesale or retail level. It's generally speaking the kind of fine finished flower that gets sold as flower, as opposed to the kind of put into other cannabis products. So in the report, we go into a little bit the difference between the operating expenses between an outdoor and indoor. It's probably not totally relevant for this conversation, but there was a question that you asked us to examine, and was how do we make adjustments to the fee schedule to better promote small local farmers? And this, reducing the outdoor cultivation fees was the consensus approach amongst the numerous stakeholder engagement that we, events that we held, including just, cultivation roundtables, public meetings, one-on-one conversations, and just kind of national research.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. This is helpful because I don't know if you heard, it seems weird that that this is coming to us now after the bill was passed, when we last week had a conversation on all of this. So I was like, wait, where is this coming from? But so this report in the table in the back is where those are the fees you're suggesting or recommending, that this basically having the outdoor fees and half.
I hate to say that we're recommending it just because really these are policy decisions on how you want them.
Well, sure, but my recollection back when we were setting these fees the first time, and I was on the finance committee and we were on Zoom, Madam Chair, I remember very specifically Bryn Hare, the former director, coming and laying out your recommendations for the fees.
Right.
So while yes, it's our job to set the fees, you all made a recommendation to us about what you thought the fees should be. And it wasn't just a fly by night recommendation. So that was my concern, is that, and that Senator Chittenden made it sound like, oh, these were just kind of pulled out of thin air. They were really, you all did analysis for coming up with those fees. And whether or not that was the same analysis you're doing now or for different purposes, that's fine, and analyses change, but they weren't random fees.
That's not the impression I meant to give.
Okay, I just,
No, but it's still been a new market. We made assumptions,
Yeah.
based things on, and now
For sure.
we're getting some reality.
for sure, that's totally fine. I just wanted to make sure that they were coming from somewhere, that this was an actual recommendation of the board. And maybe recommendation isn't, like, maybe it's too strong, but you did analysis and you concluded that this would be a good direction to go.
Right, yes. The fee setting for cannabis is always a slightly bit arbitrary, I have to say. Because a fee is supposed to cover the cost of the service provided. And we've decided, when it comes to cannabis, not just us, every single other adult in the state has said, you can't do that in this industry. You have to support the cost of regulation through cannabis excise tax. It can't be fully offset by the cultivators. It's just, it would be too much of a burden. These folks are already, subject to disproportionate tax treatment at the federal level. Banking, insurance are extraordinarily expensive for this industry. So I'm trying to just further pile on with, financing the entire cost of the agency from cultivators.
I totally get
Makes
that.
sense.
I'm
Right.
supportive of
Yeah.
trying to reduce the fees. I just
Right.
want to make sure that it was coming.
Right,
Because it was it didn't come with the bill. So
Yeah.
that's why I was like,
Yeah.
why is this happening now?
So the initial setting of fees we were given some pretty strict parameters. Try to maximize
Yeah.
revenue, cover your costs.
I remember
Try to make an accessible market. Try to support social equity. Try to do X, Y, and Z.
a lot of contradicting things.
Right, exactly. And so we spent a long time trying to figure out what those price points would be to make this market attractive for the entrepreneurs that existed and already in the market, for our list market operators. We're trying to attract into the regulated space. We try to find ways to dissuade larger operations and really give the smallest cultivators the best shot at making it in this industry. So there was just we of course always look at comparison charts with other states, other charging for fees and how the market has evolved as a result. So those initial recommendations were based on those factors. This, to the extent that it's a recommendation, we asked the board and this report requirement to make a recommendation about how fees can be adjusted to better support small local farmers. And our recommendation was, we made a number of it. I don't know how many pages the report is, but one thing that you could do would be to reduce the fees for natural cultivators. We didn't give you an explicit cut them in half recommendation. But this is the same proposal that you looked at last year with a couple of caveats. It doesn't have the kind of pay for that the proposal you looked at last year did. And it also eliminates a kind of category of mixed tier cultivators, but for the most part, it's in line with the recommendation to reduce fees for outdoor cultivators on the report.
Okay, so you're supportive of the amendment that was discussed.
It's gonna lose money.
Yeah, I always have to, and I say it in the report, you know, it's gonna further widen that delta between what our operating expenses actually are and what the fees are bringing in to the tune, and all that Ted say what the tune is, but it does further put pressure whenever we go into the appropriations committee or we go into our negotiations with the governor's office about that difference between where our operating expenses are and spring. But
Okay,
it's not,
and no one's suggesting we raise any fees in here so far.
there's no suggestion of that. In the report, I give you some examples of where you might be able to offset this cost. But that's a lot more controversial than cutting some of the fees. It's raising.
Cutting fees is never.
I just wanted, if we cut this fee, I want people to remember we're cutting a fee. Okay, guys, all right?
Feels good.
Yeah,
Press release, press release tomorrow.
yeah, finance committee cuts fees.
We haven't done that
Discuss
yet.
on.
I am trying to, Mr. Belvin was talking about a $10,000 fee. As close as I can come on the chart on appendix B, I guess that's page 20, it's an $8,000 fee
So I said 18.
for tier 4.
I thought I said 18.
I believe he's in outdoor tier 5, which
He's
is
in tier 5 and it's 18.
18.
Okay.
I believe I believe that's true. I can look quickly, but I believe that's right.
It sounds like if he's, yeah, like he has a good size outdoor operation. But indoor, definitely their costs are higher, their electric bills have got to be astronomical.
Right, yeah.
But they are growing 24/7, 365 unless the lights go out. And they haven't for any extended time. So. But that's tier 5. Are we talking tier, what year are you proposing?
So if you were to look at the report on
Yeah.
appendix B, page 20, I believe the amendment would propose to effectively cut these numbers, the numbers in blue, in half. So
In
that's
the outdoor, for all outdoor cultivators?
correct, from tier 1 through 5. And additionally, since I believe that there aren't any T6s, it cuts the T6 license.
Right. So again, when we were developing this market structure, these tiers, we really had no idea what the entrepreneurial interest was going to be. And we know we had a fixed demand for cannabis in this state. We had to supply it somehow. And so we actually, decided to have a few slightly larger tiers. I mean, again, it's all relative. These are, even the tier 6 would be small on the scale of our neighboring states. But we never opened tier 6. We never accepted applications for it, and we never intend to. So eliminating that tier, if you're going to be not playing around, if you're going to be amending this section of the statute, might as well just kind of clean up some of the, appendages from the other market.
The
Well,
risk
it
of
has to have it passed over on the floor. I mean, because if we're gonna do it, I would like to do it correctly. I've been hearing about the small outdoor growers. I was thinking that was like tier 1 and 2. But it sounds like we're really looking at all the outdoor growers. Some of who may well be part of international organizations that control the market from seed to sale. And that was one of the other considerations. We wanted to make it easier for many Vermonters who seem to have been growing and have their own market.
Do we have big weed in Vermont? Like, are there big international growers? at the T5 level?
They've been threatened.
Cause I think bigweed would be the T6 that we don't study, but
Big weed.
is that a term, bigweed, like big tobacco, bigweed?
I was gonna say, how do you
Going to-
define that?
Yeah, it could be, but I'm not tuned in, so.
You just said, cause I didn't know if that's what you heard the chair say, international growth.
Well, no, I just, in the legislature, as we, I think it took 6 years to pass this bill.
At least.
It's a long time. And there was always a balance and a concern, and I think as we went through, some of us were surprised to realize that there was already an underground market here.
Oh, yeah.
Bigger one than I think many of us realized.
Biggest in the nation is what the data takes.
Yeah, so we're trying to find the balance between those traditional small, I got an acre in my cornfield and hope the troopers don't fly over, guys. And the and the folks that would come in here or already be here that were much better capitalized and able to come up with the expense of doing indoor grows and knowing that in other places that they could control seed to sale and trying to find that balance. But like many things we were dealing in, we had Colorado at that point. I think Oregon had signed on by the time we finished, one or two other states, but it was new, it was illegal. Banks wouldn't touch you. And so we're dealing in the reality that I think most states it's legal. The federal government is talking about maybe something, getting it off Schedule 1. We're doing a lot of medical marijuana without there having been any really large data-driven studies because it's been illegal to do them. So we're kind of coming out of the dark ages, and I think we always knew as we went through this, adjustments would be necessary. But I think we also want the market to support its own regulation, very much the way we expect liquor to support its own regulation and tobacco. So we want to do this at the same time. I don't think we ever intended to make it more difficult for the smaller.
I'm relatively ambivalent on this. I think it makes sense to do it, but to your point, Madam Chair, I don't think we need to pass over it tomorrow because this could just be considered for third reading on Thursday. So if you don't want to like take a position on today, I think that actually aligns with what the appropriations they wanted to consider tomorrow afternoon anyway. So
Okay,
if you don't feel comfortable, give me your name now. It's certainly something we can do tomorrow, then figure out before third reading.
but I don't. So economic development never took this out.
Did this morning.
They did this morning, but you've never been in and no one told us last week that there were issues with this, so I'm trying to figure out what we should do.
Me too.
Well, I mean, no, economic development took it in up this morning. I was there this morning. We of course did write this report, based upon the conversation last year. I, from what I understand, it was an oversight. There was a discussion, with the chair and, the majority leader and a few other folks about doing this, and then, it just never made it into the bill, so.
Okay. So we had time last week, we could have done this.
I did try to bring it up, but it was the end of that really long day.
Yeah.
So nobody was happening, so.
So this again is 5 members of economic development that are doing this amendment.
Correct, but I will say the sense I have, that Senator Brock, correct me, is we wanted to get a sense of the money committees because it really is a money thing. So,
Well, I think it says. I don't have a problem with lowering fees. But the fees are supposed to support the operation. And I think that's the question.
Well, I think since we looked at it last year and where we are today, we've heard a lot more input from people who are in the business, who are growers. And we've seen a lot more information about the effect that the fee schedule has on smaller developers, the Vermonter who is growing things outdoors in a small plot with a small business. And we heard a little of that a year ago, but we've heard much more of that since then.
They've got to deal with
Mhm.
birds, deer. And other,
But
It's just an issue of fairness is what it appears.
yeah, but the chair's point is well taken, that who is gonna pay for the operation if the fees aren't paying for like, where's that money gonna?
Well, the question was, and then that, I guess the question for Pepper right now, if he's paying for things now.
No, no, they're not. And that was a conscious decision. I
Mhm.
mean, our fees bring in currently about $2.6 million. And our operating expenses are 7.1.
It's a big gap.
Yeah.
Now, the effect of lowering the fees on the smaller producers, how much of a dollar impact is that, in your opinion? Do you think?
If the proposal that I have, and I'll defer to Ted, but I can also just jump to the conclusion is about $100,000.
So again, it's peanuts in regard to the problem.
I'm getting to like my. One grain of sand after one grain of sand, eventually you have beach. But I feel more comfortable if we could raise something, but you're saying that would really put us out of line with surrounding states.
I had suggested in the report, if you need to have an offset, that you could look to and if the whole conversation is about relative profitability between these various license types, you could look to the tier 4 and 5 indoor cultivators as one place to raise, and you could look towards the retailers. When we presented this draft report at one of our board meetings, both of those groups were really rankled by that.
Of course they would.
Yes. So, but it's in the report. I mean, it made it in the report because frankly, we have this conversation every single year about this delta between our budget and the fees. And it's just, unless you really want to drastically change the dynamic of the market, that's going to be a continuing problem.
Well, I mean, the real issue is, for example, if you had to raise another $100,000 elsewhere in the market, where could you raise the money and have the less impact on the individual who is affected by it?
There are some recommendations in the report on that. We currently, there's an inconsistent policy around the state around ACH processing fees. We currently cover that expense at the board. Some agencies do, some agencies don't. We put that as a possible way to generate more revenue. Of course, those fees impact the smallest people, as a percentage of what their profit is more than they impact the larger people. We're in this situation no matter what. Whether you reduce these fees and further widen the delta, we're gonna have to be in the appropriations committees every year explaining why that is the case. It used to be that that difference was covered by the cannabis excise tax, which I thought was somewhat of an elegant solution, and it's the way that every single other adult use state operates. Because then the people that are directly benefiting from the regulatory oversight that the board is providing are paying for that oversight, in addition to the producers and manufacturers and retailers. But that structure changed last year. So now that gap is covered by the general fund directly.
And if you go back to overcome and try to have a quick and elegant solution that gets the revenue out of the marketplace, out of the suppliers and the like, it would seem that the larger places could absorb $100,000 much easier than the smaller places. And in terms of waiting to come up with a solution later, what we're hearing is that smaller producers are going out of business because of the cost structure that adversely affects them disproportionately. Is that fair?
That is what we're hearing, same as you heard it during your, all day or however long it was, listening session.
If our conclusion, then I think one of the things that we said is that we wanted, if we have a market in this product in Vermont, we want Vermonters to be able to profit from that market. And our larger producers that we're talking about, are they Vermonters?
Yes, I mean, for the most part, and we can't set up a law that disallows.
Based on
Yes.
your observation and
Yes,
knowledge of
yes.
who they are.
Predominantly, overwhelmingly predominantly. Vermonters.
I don't see the retailers. We got retailer fees in here.
The recommendation, is on,
Is manufacturing license.
it is on page 6 and 7 of the report, where I explained what the cost of benchmarking our price per square foot
Yeah,
of canopy to our neighboring states. And that would reduce the fees even more dramatically than this, I believe. And I suggest that, if you needed to make up that money, you could increase retail fees by $1,500, indoor tier 4s by $4,000, indoor tier 5s by $11,000, and that would fully cover the cost of benchmarking our price per square foot to other states. Other than this. But again, that's what derailed this whole conversation last year
retail.
was upping other fees in order to pay for
For
the
this.
reduction in fees.
Okay. I have to assume I've got 2 retail stores 100 feet apart, if lucky in Montpelier. There's 2 more and a medical. This is a town of 8,000 people, and there are 5 cannabis outlets. One is at least new its present location, but the other couple of them have been here for a number of years.
The commercial center.
It's, yeah, but I've only got 1 liquor store and maybe 2 beer and wine and tobacco. I've got the pharmacy and actually now that Rite Aid's gone, I don't have a pharmacy that sells beer, wine, and tobacco. So it's the grocery store and maybe Cumberland Farms.
So are we just waiting to see whether we're gonna okay or support the amendment? Because this is an amendment that you're putting out on the floor tomorrow?
I can wait till 3rd reading till Thursday. So that while you're out of the room, I think we suggested that maybe we don't vote as a committee on it today. We think some more.
I would feel better. And maybe economic development could look at it in the morning if we could find a way to cover the cost. Because if we put $100,000 in over there, it's going to get nailed to the wall if we reduce revenue by 100,000. So I'd like to see if we couldn't find a way to do that. And Ted's here.
Do we have a pulse on pros, what they're thinking?
I think they're waiting to hear how that's what I would reflect.
I mean, if the excess sales tax still goes up, I think that can cover the shortfall of low fees. Right? Because now most states do it, you have your fees and then you have your excise tax.
So you
And
want
that
to
one
raise
kinda
the
covers it.
excise.
No, I'm saying just
I-
as it naturally goes up, I think it's been growing at
Well, we get more.
how much? Each year, 10,
Projected, yeah, the JFO consensus forecast, I think, has it projected to grow 6% this year, somewhere.
Ted, do you wanna pull a chair up and join?
so if the excise tax gets support,
James
just increase.
It's the excise tax, what they
James can
used to
stay.
build.
Go ahead. Question, Chair.
Yeah,
Mr. Pepper, Chair Pepper. So yeah, I did read the report, but if that was contemplated to cover this with a slight adjustment in the tier 4 and 5 indoor growers, as I think you said is in the report, how much more are we talking based on how much they are per retailer? So what would that, not retailer, but per grower? So would this be a 10% increase on their current fees to cover the $100,000 shortfall?
I'd have to do a little bit of math. We have one tier 4 indoor, and we have 2 tier 5s. We have 3.
I'm saying, you know,
not gonna have an amendment today. The word is out.
We're not doing the amendment though, so we don't have to.
No, they came in, I said, we might have an amendment. For the Senate secretary, so I'm just having us tell them they don't have to
Oh.
vote first for the calendar, because we're not getting this out this afternoon. And is approach
Well, we
taking this up at all?
they would like to know that the way I've left it is they would like to know where Senate Finance stands on this, and then I would bring it to them.
Okay,
Does Ted have it?
well, that's what we're waiting.
Yeah, with those numbers, you have to double it.
You have to double, it. Those are pretty large fees already.
Okay. Ted, what can you tell us?
Everyone Joint Fiscal Office, concur with what Chair Pepper said about the estimate of the fees. I would probably round it up just to be conservative to $105,000. Yes, just general conversation around it is, since it is fee revenue that goes into the regulation fund that supports the board. That would be $105,000. That's not in the control fund, and so either you would have to ask the control board to do their work without, with $100,000 fewer dollars, which I don't think they would like, or you would have to find that revenue somewhere to continue to kind of plug that amount of special fund that's currently in their budget request. So yes, I think, it sounds like there are a bunch of considerations on how to potentially find that other revenue, and I'm happy to,
What's the sales tax?
Yeah.
Just curious.
So looking at the consensus revenue forecast, the forecast for FY27 is $23.6 million.
Is that sales or?
That's excise tax. So this is all right in the general fund conversation.
Yep.
We're all referring to the excise tax, and then it increases to $24.3 million in fiscal year 28, which is an increase of 3.2%.
How much is that in dollars? Sorry.
That is for plus $700,000. You are looking at future rates. So the appropriators are building their budget based on the construct they have for fiscal year 27. And so the growth in fiscal year 28 isn't relevant to really the budgetary conversations that are happening for the upcoming fiscal year. And I would just broadly note that since the excise tax is going into the general fund versus whether the excise tax supports the board expenses first versus going into the general fund first and being a part of the appropriations process, it's kind of a little, I would say they're roughly the same source, right?
There were a lot of compromises to get it.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
excise tax goes into the general fund, and then some sort of money goes into this forward fund or a special fund. How does the money flow to that?
Sure. So excise tax revenues right now, they are 70% goes to the general fund, 30% goes to the substance misuse prevention special fund.
Yep.
And of that 70%, it's just the general fund, and then the control board comes forward with their budget request. This is starting in fiscal year 27. In previous years, they were receiving money from the regulation fund, which was excise tax revenues went into the regulation fund. So starting this year, excess tax revenues are starting in Yeah, so they go forward, they make their budget request. And so in the budget request, as Chair Pepper mentioned earlier, it's comprised of $2.5 million in special funds. I'm rounding a bit, it's an exact dollar figure. And that's from fees, and then the remainder is general funds, so it's $4.5 million in general funds. So they're like many other folks in state government, right? They're putting forward a budget request and having a collection of funds, and part of that is general fund, part of that is special fund, and so there's no direct linkage between the excise tax and the control board right now. But since the excise tax goes into the general fund and the control board is receiving general fund, some people make that linkage in their minds, but really it's just in the general fund.
Wall Street raiders don't like it.
So I was trying to add all those numbers. What's the budget of your board? So. Yeah, the sense have like 25% overhead on our market. Is that
We take, right,
based on sales, excess?
that's 6 from the general fund. You know, I know that number sounds high, especially when we started with two positions,
Yeah.
full-time positions. But we've done some analysis on how our staffing compares to every other candidates board. And, you know, New Jersey, they've got 1 FTE for every 3 licenses that they have. Massachusetts has 1 for every 5. Maine has 1 for every 7. We have 1 for every 20. So, we have
They're being very efficient.
we're very efficient. That's right.
Maine.
I was just curious,
Okay,
whole life cycle of the money.
I mean,
So basically, I was just gonna say, so basically it comes down to you going to a pros and saying, hey,
Yeah.
finance took $100,000 away from us to lower our fees, to make our market more competitive for the outside growers. Can you give us $100,000, basically?
and they're gonna join the long line into the wall out there.
In a sense, maybe it increases excise tax revenues and covers that.
That's it, we don't know, but he's gotta send out his paychecks tomorrow. And so,
So just really quick, one thing that maybe might thread the needle on this is if we did pump this out a year, and I've heard that we found this before, though I hear some legislators, some administrators don't like it, but if we made the fee drop conditional upon some metric, including excise revenues. So, yeah,
no,
it's been done, it's just not necessarily.
yeah, they're doing that out west they'll do away with the income tax when increased business activity on the promise of no income tax covers the cost. They tend to be neighbors of Texas who doesn't have an income tax. I learned that at
Just
it's disheartening. Because everyone here wants me to raise it, but it's, I mean, I think it would be better and more honest if we just raised another fee. And the question is, who's going to be least hurt by raising that fee? Because nobody is going to say, oh, yes, please increase my fees. And anyone is probably at the highest risk. I mean, yeah, if you open the 5th or 6th store in Montpelier, you're probably making a risk. I'd have to question your market analysis, but you may know better than I do. But it seems that the people at the most risk are the outside growers, and especially the smaller ones. I mean, we've lost apple orchards because we've had a frost in June. We had a drought last year and crops died up. In other years, it rains so much, your tractor sinks.
We just talked about separately, lowering the amount of money that we put in for an increase in tobacco from $1,000 to perhaps $150 for retailers. I don't know how much that amount represented, but we've already put something in. Based on,
Tobacco cessation.
We already lowered a fee.
and I'm not sure exactly what that raises, but that may be the delta right there.
700 retailers. I don't know, Ted would know this, so how much?
But that's lower.
I did so much. But
But one of the things I
Well,
think
we
that you
actually
said.
raised it from what it is.
Yeah, well, what we did though, what we said is we had to change the bill
lowering.
to $100,000. We proposed lowering it to $150.
Yeah,
As I recall, the average seems to be for most of the states that we looked at, the fee is about, current fee is about $200 to $250. It's that delta. If we raised it to the average fee of the other states, we might have enough money to make the difference here.
Are you talking about raising the tobacco
Yeah.
fees to pay for the cannabis fees? Oh, there's some irony to that or there's something there. I don't know.
Those are two groups of people that might go back.
Oh, there's something there.
Yeah.
But what about, I think raising a fee in the cannabis market to pay for the speaking seems not feasible. Given that fees are already, as far as I remember, high. But what about doing it over a 2-year period? Like, so that we
50,000 this year and 50,000
exactly,
next year.
so that, and we sort of bank on the increase in excise tax, and hopefully spur the market.
I mean, what else?
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Okay.
I think, yeah, exactly. I think that your point about the excise tax rate.
Why would we get more in the excise tax?
Because you can grow more, I don't know.
Well, just the growth of the
The
fund and
growth,
also,
yeah.
also if it's more attainable for more cultivators inside.
Yeah. Yeah,
If I may,
We've had hemp markets flooded.
I was going to make a comment about excess. We're not entirely sure, right, that additional supply in the market would, how that would impact excise tax revenue. If you have additional supply and that has a downward pressure on prices, you might actually see the opposite of your intended effects. Yeah, wanted to throw that as.
that's fair.
We do
point.
have market flood, right, fall or potential
Where's Amanda?
when all the, because they harvest
At the same time.
at the same time. It's the indoor guys that have a much more control. And I gather cannabis doesn't sit around for a year, and do well.
It can,
It can, but,
it can be flash frozen and it's, maintained its,
okay, but that's an expense flash.
right, and then you're paying for keeping it frozen,
So if they have to do that, they might as
Frozen bug?
Popsicle.
No.
Popsicles.
No. And I didn't think we were allowed to do candy, but one of the lobbyists brought me back a thing that looked just like root beer barrels that he bought downtown, cannabis infused.
So
Found that
All
pepper.
right,
if Senator Brock is okay with this, I think what I will ask of the economic development is to not introduce this amendment tomorrow, to give some more time to think about this, so we can monitor the third reading when you
ask them to,
think about where it comes from.
yeah. Tell them we need to raise $100,000.
Talk to friends across the hall. Or see about a 2-year thing.
Or
But
see,
across, if we cover our costs, across the hall isn't gonna care.
that's already.
They just don't want $100,000 hole. And I can tell you right now, they are looking under every barrel they can. It's very tight.
Oh my gosh.
Anybody who is under any buildings in Texas, there is a VSAC reception upstairs, folks.
Lisa?
And there's a chairs meeting.